There we go.
Hello. How are
Hello.
you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm caffeinating.
Yeah, same here actually. It was like a really rainy, kind of dismal day in New England.
Mm.
So it's just one of those like seasonal things where you just wake up and you're just like stagnant and just like all day. So
Okay, well, I am like get psyched. I'm in a get psyched mood right now, so I hope you are ready to we're just gonna psych each other up. You've got the best hair right now that I wish I could just it's not gonna happen. Mine's
I,
not
I
going
wish I could
anywhere.
I wish I could tell you that wasn't intentional. So I wear one of these winter hats purchased because I have like the skinny Seth Rogen look. I have really curly hair. So I wear one of these and then up till like when I post this, unfortunately, because they always do like leave in the very awkward like you're setting up thing. So it's gonna be a lot of me just doing this, like, all right, the maximum amount of cool I could possibly look right now.
It was amazing. I was actually watching it. I was like looking good.
Well, now that just, I'm still in a psyched out mood, but
I liked it. So, how do you want to do this? Because I have notes. So I was going to moderate you, but did you have notes as well? How are we?
I was pretty much going to follow your lead as Atmosphere had just put up. I was totally fine all day, and then I
Right?
saw Atmosphere had put something up like, oh, people might actually come now. Okay, so I'm ready to follow your lead.
Okay, that was so amazing. I just read that. I saw it now and I was like, oh, that like that much love to Atmosphere. What a sweet post for us. I was so grateful. Okay, well, I guess, I got, back into this last night. You have this amazing book called Nothing to Get Nostalgic About, which
Thank you.
this book caught my eye when I first started with Atmosphere because I have to give huge props to whomever designed this cover. I love your cover and I love the title, Nothing to Get Nostalgic About.
That is one
So,
of my least favorite things about the book. I hated the title when I went and titled the manuscript because at that point the working title was just called Turtle Rock, and my wife was like, "That title
oh,
sucks. That title's got to go."
yeah,
I
yeah.
think she even I was writing it in janitor closets at the nursing home I worked at, and she was actually going around to other charge nurses saying, "This is the working title of this book," and was like getting like votes on how many people liked it and how many people like, "Yeah, I could live without it."
Yep, yep.
And I finished the manuscript, and it was just one of those stream of conscious things. I was just sitting there, and just because the funny thing about the title too is it's so assertive in that it's nothing to get nostalgic about. And the one thing that keeps popping up is people being like, I love how the guy that wrote Nothing to Get Nostalgic About is one of the most nostalgic people I've ever met in my life.
You really are. You Hey, it works. It works. Now, can I ask one more question? When it
Mhm.
came to this, is there anything on here that ties to the story, or did you give insight or say, hey, this is like meaningful, or is this just like a beautiful picture?
That was just the artist. He actually recently friended me, and I feel so unprepared to not have his name readily available. But we're
Oh,
actually friends on here.
that's nice.
Jos Joseph Laledo. I'm not
Okay.
sure, I'm probably butchering that name, so sorry, my friend, but no, he designed. So I got probably a bunch of mock-ups. I want to say maybe there were at least 10 to 15. And one of the things, so when they come to you, obviously, Atmosphere, Nick asked me, he goes, we like if the author sent us like 10 to 15 photos of book covers that you really like. And I was really jiving with this. You know what would be really cool is I wanted to picture a book like this sitting on in my sister's closet when we were kids. She just had a stack of like R.L. Stine, Fear Street, and a lot of V.C. Andrews stories. So I immediately went to Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews.
Oh,
It was like I want a really gothic looking, very just, but I also want a cover that says nothing about the book at all. Like I don't want any hints in there. And there was one cover actually, it was a house on fire. And I was showing my wife these pictures, and she goes, "That's way too on the nose. Like you got to pick something that's completely. It just, it's a beautiful cover, but it'll invite people in, but it won't give anything away about the plot."
yeah. Yeah.
So
I
ultimately,
it
that
does
was
that it doesn't give anything away. So I thought, well, maybe there was something I was missing that you could like fill me in. Yeah,
no,
it is. It's just eye-catching. Okay, okay.
yeah.
So he did.
And that's again, that was a wife thing. I put her in charge, and I just said, "Look, I can't make this decision. I'm way too biased. Because something, and I feel horrible saying this, but something I've always been a firm believer in. I would never self-publish a book because I have no faith whatsoever in my ability to construct a cover. And for what it's worth, the old saying, "You never judge a book by its cover." Oh, you absolutely do, because I was even reading that show on HBO Max, The Flight Attendant. Kaylee Cuoco actually bought the rights to that book. She had never even read it. She was in an airport, saw the book in an airport bookshop, loved the cover so much, and she said, "I want the rights to that book." Hadn't even cracked it open, didn't even read it, and then that became the show that she got nominated for this past award season for the show she did for, I believe it was HBO Max.
That is the coolest thing. I've never heard this story before, so now I'm gonna have to go down that rabbit hole later
Oh yeah,
today.
it was like very, it affirmed that whole belief I have that like if you have a really crappy album or book cover, people are just gonna walk right by it and be like, it's not selling me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yep. Well, winner.
Oh,
Absolute
thank you.
winner. Okay, so now I know we're going to do a reading at some point, but as far as the book goes, like one of the things I struggled with the most was getting my synopsis out because that like gives a little blurb of the story, but doesn't give the whole thing away. What do you want people to know about this book when you're saying, okay, this is the little blip that I want to sell it? What's
That's really tough. So I noticed that you had commented on this post. I posted that clip from the movie Liar Liar of Jim Carrey just like like just like
oh my God. It was,
and
yes.
I watched that clip about 30 times, and it wasn't even because like I love that movie. I grew up with that movie, but what made that clip made me laugh so hard was in querying agents right now for a manuscript, so many of them are so adamant that you know how to sell this book already. You know how to
Yeah.
sell it to them. And every time it's like, well, compare this title to other titles. Who are your readers? What kind of people want to read this book? And I'm just sitting there like, I have no idea. So when they're asking for like a synopsis, especially when Nick was like, "All right, Eddie, you got to write a synopsis for your book," I was sweating that so much. And it took me a little while. And finally, toward the end of the night, I'm like, I have to send him something because if I sit on this, I'll be on this for weeks.
Yep. Yep.
And because of the timeline thing, because I didn't, again, the book that actually became what it is now was not the original idea. The
Oh,
concept for this book came up in 2013. I had won an award. I was at community college and I won an award for a best creative nonfiction story
okay.
that I've written. We did a thing called a braided essay where you take like little paragraphs of like a fragmented story, but somehow they all correlate to like a larger narrative. So I got lazy at the time. My dad was diagnosed with cancer. My mind was just not into it. So I just started copying and pasting Facebook posts that I had put out there and put it into that. And me and this other girl, we tied. We both got $200 scholarships. And I remember sitting in the parking lot of my second job. I worked at a West Elm, and I was there like an hour and a half, 2 hours early. So I was going to take a nap. And I just started randomly in that nap, started thinking about the pipe people and seances and all this weird crap that my sisters used to do. And I remember thinking like, I've never written a book before ever. And I started just making notes. And it kind of went down this rabbit hole of the two characters originally were supposed to be two boys. It was supposed to be loosely based off of a real friendship I had with this kid Brian growing up.
Okay.
And I was going to take my life experiences and tie them in with some of the weird stuff that we had experienced as kids. Because back in the 90s, everybody had a Ouija board. Everybody loved to watch the television that their parents told them not to after midnight. So we'd sit up at sleepovers watching, like, cable TV. We'd be watching America Undercover. We'd be watching all these bizarre documentary series about the afterlife and all this stuff. And the book's never going to see the light of day, so I can just tell it. But originally, it was going to be a fictional spin on that friendship where this one kid moves to a new town. He makes this new friend who he's very eccentric, is the only one that gets him. And then he disappears. One night, he's watching television, and I probably shouldn't even explain how I came up with this concept, but he's watching television, and back in the 80s, not so much in the 90s, but back in the 80s, when a broadcast had ended, they used to play the national anthem. And then it would just cut out and it'd be like white snow that would make this like awful noise. And I had pictured this kid just kind of laying in his bed and two figures shaped like people, but they're static. So they're static people coming and kidnapping him and taking him into the television.
Okay.
Don't ask where that came from. I was probably a little stoned. This was before children and a wife, and I was a respectable author, and I stopped there because I love this idea of going back to my childhood and revisiting, not necessarily loving it, but going back and visiting traumas and visiting old friends and coming up with a whole world based off of memories I had of growing up in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I wanted to keep the element of almost like domestic terrorism of just growing up in kind of a broken family. So the character that goes missing, the friend just does not accept it. Everyone's saying, well, it was his stepdad, dude. The stepdad killed him. He killed the mom too. And it just kind of fell off. It didn't materialize. And then so many years went by, and, I tried. My first manuscript was so bad. I wrote a memoir.
Oh, you
called
did.
It was called The Thrift Store Existentialist with the Mixtape Heart. And it was basically this whole story about my dad getting cancer. It was basically the journey of me falling in love with my wife and
Nice.
my dad dying. Because people would tell me, because I'd be on Facebook all the time when I had it, and I'd be writing these kind of anecdotes about my life, and people are just like, you may not think it, but some of the stuff you put out there is really, you should write a book about it. And of course, that went nowhere. It actually didn't go anywhere. So my wife recently found this when we were cleaning the house. We actually turned my manuscript from that memoir into the aisle that we walked down at our wedding.
Wow. That's amazing. Good for
and then after that, unique. I wrote a sci-fi story that my wife is like badgering me. She's like, you have to find that story. I think you should send that to Atmosphere. I wrote a horror anthology, a children's book, and then I kind of just lost my gusto for it because, of course, as writers, you should be used to this, but all you really get are rejections. So after so many rejections, I'm like, that's it. And then out of nowhere, the story, when I became a dad, my son was probably about 3 or 4 months old, and that's when the story started coming back to me.
Okay.
And I had abandoned the whole idea of the two boys, and I thought, without getting sued, without getting, completely ostracized from my family, what if I make the main characters me and my two sisters? It's not going to be them. I'll loosely base certain details. And it was funny because when my oldest sister read it, she was, fact checking me, so to speak. And one of the incidents in the story, I didn't even know really happened. I thought I made it up, but it actually happened.
Oh, geez. Oh, man.
There's a passage in the book where the parents are divorced and the father writes lewd messages all over town with the wife's work number and her phone number.
Yes, I was reading that part last night.
That actually happened. My dad did that to my mother. So our phone was ringing off the hook at home. And my mom would instruct my sisters, unplug that phone, do not answer it. So I had ran with it knowing who my sister was when we were younger. Like I thought, what if the older sister answers the phone? And, one thing leads to a very bad thing that she does. But she goes, fact check, I never slept with the guy that I answered the phone call from. And I go, wait, what? And she goes, oh, yeah, I actually answered a few of those calls.
Oh,
I never knew that. That wasn't even a through the grapevine thing. That had to have been a writing intuition thing. I never knew that she had done that ever. It was just, to me, it just seemed like, well, if you're a kid, like, because at the time she had to have been 13. Because she's on like the tail end of Gen X, so she was around for Nirvana and all that stuff, which plays out later in the book. But so I just kind of thought in the mind of a teenager, like, what would you do if these, these perverts were calling your house all the time, harassing you or your mother? So,
Yeah. Yeah. It is so dark where you go with all of this stuff, but you like I never once read it and feel like stressed or anxious or like I can't keep running with it. You write it in such a way that it's very palatable. I have to commend you for that because what you dive into is darker than what most people can, can swallow and but they can process it through reading this. I love that.
that's not even a writing thing. And it's not like a source of pride for me, but like I was at a friend's wedding and, turn the pew, shake the hand of the person, and it was her dad. And I'm like, oh, hi, I'm Eddie. And I'm just like a nervous guy to begin with. And the one thing I hear so frequently is, Eddie, you're a really intense guy. And it's just
Yeah.
like, I am. Like it doesn't, like, I don't know. And it does. It comes up a lot, especially in writing with like the poems I write and the stuff I publish where people are just like, damn, dude, that is a dark fucking story. And to me, it doesn't. I'm just writing what comes naturally. Like a lot of it is based off of real life experience, which is
Yeah.
probably horrifying to say out loud to people. So like, holy crap, that's your real life.
Well, especially because I mean, this technically falls under horror,
Yeah,
horror in your genre. I'm mixing horror and genre into one word today. I'm really tired.
horror.
Horror. This is a new genre today coming at you. But so, I mean, it is. It has those horror elements. It has the specters. It has the hallucinations, the Ouija boards, the pipe people, all of the different elements that really do fit nicely into horror. Except it doesn't have that one thing that I really, really don't like about horror, which is like it doesn't make me feel sick and angry and kind of like stressed out. It actually is once again like welcoming and inviting in such a way that I'm not scared of it.
Well, because that was always the idea was that if it feels that way, that's because part of the story that again Bryce, the gentleman that helped me edit it, he had said what I love so much about this story is in his words, you have so much ooga booga going on.
Oh,
But none of the kids are phased by the Ooga Booga. They're more focused on the broken homes they all come from,
yes.
which again was
Yes.
a very true aspect to my life growing up, which was, when that gentleman Brian grew up, like him and his brother, they invite me over and we'd all do the Ouija board thing. And, I'd go to my friends, and actually Feather Quill Press had asked me about this in the book. They're like, what elements of the book, because they feel very tactile, they feel very real. Can you give away what's kind of real? I said, well, what is real is that a lot of us were latchkey kids because our parents had to work. Back then, if you had older siblings, guess who your babysitter was?
Yeah.
And if you had a hapless older sibling, like I did with two teenage girls who had no interest in watching Power Rangers with me or, sitting and watching horror movies with me, their whole thing was like, I'm going to go hang out with my friends. So I spent a lot of time by myself. I spent a lot of time watching bad daytime TV like Morton Downey Jr., Sally Jesse Raphael, and seeing these really, like hard copy was big back then, America's Most Wanted, seeing these really horrifying shows. And
Yeah.
in the 90s, teen runaways, which is something I did deal with my sisters who were both runaways at one point, almost every macabre or horrific story went back to teenagers running away from home, being kidnapped, the parent murdered them in the backyard, and like not to go off because I know we only have an hour or so, but like the music video for Soul Asylum's "Runaway Train,"
Oh
the
yeah.
song was written about the lead singer, his depression, and the director said, let's take the '90s approach, let's turn this into a PSA for teen runaways. I believe his name's Dave Perner, and he would do gigs, and kids that were featured prominently in that video, what their actual "Have you seen me" pictures, would approach him and say, thank you for ruining my life. I had run away from a horrific home environment, and somebody saw the
Oh.
music video with my picture on it, and the person had been living with a best friend or hiding out with a boyfriend or something. One girl even, they found her buried in the backyard. Her mother had killed her. So there was a lot of
Wow.
that kind of, I think where a lot of my writing comes from is I'm not a nostalgic, but I'm still kind of trapped in the 90s in terms of like,
You are.
you know, my experiences as a young boy growing up and hearing like the folklore with my sister and her friends and, sitting up with them because my parents are out or whatever. And we're listening to the Tupac Machiavellian album and this really horrific image of Tupac, cartoon Tupac, like hanging from a cross, and being really young and not understanding what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, and
Yeah.
just being terrified 24/7, just horrified all the time.
Yes, I could see that. I feel like that's how I felt when I saw that stuff as a kid. Like I was just like I was too scared. I couldn't even look at it. But so I have you are going to do a reading, right?
Yes.
All right. I have to say I want to do some Q&A at the end, but I want everyone that's tuned in right now to know that if you have questions, feel free to shoot them in at any given moment because they just queue up and then we'll either answer them as, as you shoot them out or all together at the end. So,
Yeah, works for me. All right, so am I reading now?
I think we should.
All
What have
right.
you
Well,
chosen to read? I'm so excited,
so
actually.
I actually, this could probably be a horrible idea to read this, but I chose a little bit toward the end, like the very, very end, just because the book's been
Oh,
out since September, and mostly because I figured, if we didn't get a lot of questions, there's some stuff here that I could kind of dive into and say, well, this is because this part of the book was actually inspired by an actual conversation that I had with someone.
okay.
So it's the part in the book where Tasha meets up with Charlie at the funeral.
Okay.
And they're kind of just, shooting the shit. And then she texts him, invites him, hey, I want you to come down to this restaurant, meet me there, and we'll talk, we'll catch up. And when they're there, you realize that she's been the guardian for Destiny, his late sister's child. And they're just kind of going back and forth about what's been going on in the town since he's been gone. He's been, kind of AWOL. And then this was the piece where he was walking her home and she kind of dives into what life's been like since he's been gone. And I'll kind of get into why I chose this after, but this is on page 343. So,
Thank you.
all right. So it
Yeah, you're
goes.
right at the end.
So Tasha couldn't help but take pity on this little boy who was trapped in a man's body and immediately held on to him for dear life. It's okay, she reassured him. He dug his fingernails into the back of her neck and shoulders. And now he wants my baby, he sobbed. Your baby, she asked. He was going to hurt all of us, so I killed him, and now he wants my baby. Tasha propped Charlie up and firmly grabbed his face in her hands. Charlie, he's dead, she sobbed. He can't hurt you anymore, and I'm so sorry that I didn't know. Charlie cried in her arms for a while before finally composing himself and divulging all the events that brought him back home. He wants Dylan, he gasped. I have to stop him. Tasha realized that she couldn't rationalize life and death with her friend anymore, and the two just walked in complete silence in the playground where his house once stood. Charlie, she pleaded, he's gone. He can't hurt you anymore. Look. She aggressively pointed Charlie's face toward the playground. I'm tired of losing my friends, my past, and my life to superstition, she pleaded. This town isn't cursed. The decade we grew up in was. Our parents were manically depressed, alcoholic drug users who never deserved us. There is no curse. There's only us. She then reached for his clammy and shaking hand and brought him to the swing set with her. Charlie, it's just us now, she pleaded. Go home tomorrow. Go home and put this place and its pain so far away from you as you can. Forget everything you think you feel, and please, please, please start over. For me. Charlie was slumped over on his swing, staring at his shoes. I have to do one more thing, he threatened. Tasha immediately shook her head at him. No, no, Charlie. Gigi and Turtle Rock don't even exist anymore, she insisted. Look. She motioned to the new housing developments. Just go home, Charlie. Go home and save yourself for Dylan. There's nothing left here for you to face. I'm telling you as someone who never moved on from it. It'll take you with it. What do you mean? He asked. I had to convince myself, she started, that all my friends moved on, went to college, met wives and husbands, settled down, started families, just so I could wake up every day. All of my friends are dead. Heroin, suicide, murder. I lost everyone I loved. And I wanted to just focus on that because it's that growing up, because I grew up with two teenage mothers. I mean, I watched two women's lives like just end, and they have gorgeous kids. I love my nieces and nephews, but for what it's worth, socially speaking, their lives were done. It was over.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching my sisters watch life just kind of happen or move on without them. And this is probably 98, because there was a very specific reason I picked 1998 to be where the event takes place. And a lot of it was because this really disastrous thing happened in my family. There's courts involved, there's lawyers, there's my other sister and her baby are gone. There's, again, restraining orders. We can't see them, they can't see us. My oldest sister was kind of MIA at that point. She was off with her boyfriend. And it was just me. And it was the following year I was going to be starting middle school. And I had just come out of a fifth grade year that I actually talk about in the book. Mrs. V is a very real person. All the stories about the stuff that Mrs. V used to do to me all happened. I mean, I joked about it to people that, oh, I'm putting that bitch in the book. I'm putting her on blast. And I started getting private messages from people who were saying, oh my God, she was awful. She traumatized me. She ruined my childhood.
Oh my.
And I realized that, oh my God, like it went back to that shared trauma thing
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
just you feel a connection to these people because you all went through it together.
Yeah.
In 1998, 99, those 2 year back to back, those I remember those 2 summers specifically because my family, for what it was worth, was over in 98. It was just me and my parents at that point. My sister kind of comes back into the fray to take care of me because at that point, my parents are like, we don't have anyone for him now. So I pretty much raised myself on instant breakfast, bad daytime TV, late night HBO shows I shouldn't have been watching, and just folklore stuff you'd hear around town, stuff, you just kind of absorbed everything because you spent so much time alone that any chance you got to be around people, you just kind of absorbed their lives because your life had no meaning anymore. There was nothing in it for you. There was no future. There was no hope. And then in 99, my sister had started experiencing the deaths of some of her best friends. Now, mind you, by this point, she was, on the verge of getting, I think 99, she was pregnant, but 98, she had gotten pregnant that summer. My timeline's all messed up. But as a future mom to be, a bunch of her best friends had passed in car accidents and drug overdoses and stuff like that. And it just, for the longest time, I watched as my sister was just frozen in time. Everybody else was moving on. Everybody else was growing up except for her. She was so nostalgic and she had a baby. She was a mother in my eyes. She was a grown up. But looking back, it was like, she was just an 18, 19-year-old kid. So I found that aspect to be very important to me to write about that. But with that part specifically, I wanted to kind of acknowledge what happens when you're kind of stuck in a situation where you just feel like you're losing so many things around you. And the only thing that's motivating you to keep going is kind of fantasizing about, well, in my mind, this is where they all wound up. And the other part was when my father died, I went into like a really, really bleak depression. Not because he died, but because I got no closure with our horrible relationship and the stuff he did to me as a kid. And a friend of mine, who I don't know if I should say this out loud, she knows who she is, but Tasha was kind of an amalgamation of a lot of friends I had growing up. And one of those friends I was talking to around the time my dad passed, and her whole thing was like, go, move on, don't revisit, don't go backwards, don't get nostalgic, don't get angry. So that was kind of like my little tribute to her, was she had that when she could tell that I was really like bottoming out. Because again, I grew up with such little intervention from people. I mean, therapy was frowned upon. I wasn't actually allowed to go to therapy as a kid. And I mean, now, like, I have a certain person who tell me, well, we tried to take you and you told us no. Well, I was the kid, you were the adult. No does not apply here.
Yeah, yeah.
When in actuality, it was me going to them saying, I want to go, and them saying, absolutely not. Like, we don't want anything you say to be held against us. So that was the other thing in the 90s too, was without social media, without basically every single person being a paparazzi with a smartphone in their pocket, things were very taboo, very kept in the closet, so to speak. Very like, if your family had skeletons, oh, we're not opening that door. We're gonna padlock that fucker shut.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so different now. That is such a snapshot in time when you go back to it because people can't really even have that anymore. It's almost not possible.
Yeah, there's really no such thing as privacy anymore because, you get a kid that's pissed off at their parents, they're gonna put them on blast on social media, like
yeah.
hashtag I hate my mom.
Oh my God. You gotta watch out.
Right.
So,
Whereas a lot of us in our generation, we kind of grew up just walking around with the cumbersome weight of like, oh, the deep, dark family secrets that were crushing us because we're just like, I just want to tell someone, but God forbid.
yes. So, one of my big things is like the healing power of memoir. I know this isn't memoir, but the healing power of writing a story, processing childhood trauma through things like this. On the other side of it, now that everything is said and done and you've written this story and you've shared it with people, how has that affected you as a person emotionally, like through your healing journey? Do you feel like you've transcended anything or
And it's such an anticlimactic thing to say because one day I wasn't healed, I was just over it.
Right.
One day I just woke up and I was just over it. And I think what happened was I started warning like my mother and my oldest sister, 'cause I don't really talk to my other sister, but like through a third party, I'd say like, don't let this one read into it. It is fiction.
Yeah, yeah.
It's gonna hit those familiar chords, but just because it sounds like a Police song doesn't mean I ripped off the Police and said, this is my song. Um, and I'd grown up with my mother my whole life. When I was 5, she had this electric typewriter. I remember the sound it would make when she would type on it. And my father had found this other typewriter. It wasn't as fancy. It was like one of those old school ones in the trash can. So what I used to do is I used to put it on my little types table and I used to push the table over next to her while she would type and I'd pretend to type my story. So I had this really grand idea that one day I'm going to make my mom so proud. I'm going to be a published writer and it's going to be so healing. And it had the opposite effect. She was not happy. And
Oh,
she found every reason to avoid reading the story. I mean, we're talking for 3 months, I was kind of badgering her, like, did you read it? And when I realized that I wasn't getting what I needed from her, or what I wanted from her, I immediately just was like, you know what, I'm over it. I'm over it.
yeah.
So in that aspect, yes, the not so over it aspect is when you're an author and you put something into the world, like with children or with anything you create and you're proud of, when you don't feel like the immediacy of like people got it and it's everybody loves it or hates it or whatever, crickets for so long. Like I had like my close friends like texting me and sending me pictures and oh, I'm so proud of you and telling me how much they loved Charlie and wanted to hold him and how much they pretty much hated the way I grew up. And that felt nice because that was very healing because it felt like for me in my life there were things where like again I had a sister pregnant at 15 and people were looking at me a different way when I was 10 or 11 and I was in 5th grade.
Yeah.
But to me that was my world, that's all I knew, so there was nothing really unusual about it. And then when you realize that it for a lot of people like their lives were kind of equally as messed up, you feel less alone and
Yeah.
you do feel this insulation of my friend Cindy likes to refer to it as a tribe. And that's her big thing. And she'll tell me all the time,
Yeah.
Eddie, you have your tribe. You have your tribe here
Mhm.
who we all get it. So yeah, but in a lot of ways, yeah, it was very because I started writing it in 2000, the fall of 2017. I finally finished it because I took a break. I just stopped. I just one night was just like, this is too much. I can't. I got halfway through. I was like, I gotta stop. And
Yeah.
then for whatever reason, I finished it. I picked it back up in the spring of 2018 and finished it by like May or June or whatever.
Okay.
And then it sat on my desktop for 2 years. And then I saw the atmosphere, the call for submissions in 2019. And I thought, whatever, it cost me nothing to just submit. So I'll do that. And it was a few nights before Christmas and I got the email from Nick and was like, wait, what? That he was interested in it. So, I mean, yeah, there were a lot of weird aspects to this book that were very, very healing and felt very like appropriate. Like
Yeah.
it's gonna sound so silly, but the third Bill and Ted movie was supposed to come out the day my book came out. It was supposed to come out September 1st of last September. And it actually came out a week before, but it was kind of apropos to me because Bill and Ted were these characters that I became familiar with as a latchkey kid. So it was like, oh, my good friends are coming back around the same time I'm putting out a book. So
I love it. Um, so the locally sourced, I'm not sure that I know you, but she asked a really
that's
good
my friend Allison,
question.
actually.
Okay, because I think that this is huge. Something about the book now, in hindsight, when you go back and you read it, or like any section that you're going, oh, fuck. Like as soon as I started reading my book in preparation for the reading you did for me, I had to quit because I was like, yeah, I wanted to change so many things.
No, it's
No.
it's
Oh God,
it's
that's amazing.
no, well, and it's one of those things that in the months leading to it coming out, I had beaten the crap out of myself emotionally. Like there was stuff that hit the editing room floor when I was working with Bryce because
Yeah,
some of it was a little too on the nose in terms of how I grew up, and I just felt like, oh, you're just looking for trouble if you keep that.
yeah,
So I had already done a lot of that obsessing over that stuff before the book was published. So by the time the book came out, and I had read and reread, and clearly not enough because there are spelling errors that got away from me, but or typos. But there's definitely a part of me that was like, by the time it was done, I was just like, you know what? This is as confidently as I can be about anything I've done creatively. This is the no going backstage. This is you've laid it all out on the line.
Yeah.
You're all in here. Just you have to own that now, and you have to just say that I left it all in the book. It's all there.
That is a fantastic feeling. Now, we've talked about music a lot. I think when you and I first started talking, music and the influence of that on our writing was a big part of the conversation. And you obviously have your 90s like playlists in you, and you have a linger story that are you
So that was actually so the whole dance sequence at the Boys and Girls Club, and I love telling the story. I went with I Swear because it was just such a definitive like 90s school dance type song. And I'm a sucker for it. I still love that song so much. And of course,
I wish I
it's
could play music right now because I would totally have things going.
so what actually happened was that incident happened, just not in the way. So in the book that I sent you, the one that I just finished, I actually told the actual story, which was when I was younger. So we had an in-law basement in this house, in the famous house in the book.
Okay.
And my oldest sister kicked me out. That used to be my like the playroom, the downstairs. Hang on, Aaron. She's like, no, I'm moving in. And every Friday or Saturday, she used to have like, oh my God, like 20 kids down there. And one of the things I swear to God, it was like the club, the Studio 54 of the 90s. And they'd lock me out of it. And I'd be like that loser standing outside the doors, like waiting for like the bouncer to come back and let me in. And what they would do, and it was so funny because I saw the documentary Kid 90 with the actress that was Punky Brewster. And so many of the parties that she had as a kid looked like my sister's parties. Flannel for days, baggy pants, the smell of menthol cigarettes on everybody. Like just it was all these kids in our basement, and there was just one boombox pushed by like the vanity closet, and they would just be down there moshing and dancing and everything else.
Nice.
So this one time that I finally get to go in because they eventually took pity on me. I think it was the guy friends were finally like, "Oh, don't be a dick to him, let him in." And it was back to back. It was Smells Like Teen Spirit into House of Pain's Jump Around, and they were because I've always been a little like just really skinny, just really painfully skinny. So they were just like, tossing me around the room in a mosh pit like I was an Elmo doll. Because actually, if you see the back of the Dookie album by Green Day, there's like, I think is it an Elmo or I think it's like a Burt doll. But basically that's what I looked like in this basement, just hanging in the crowd. But then they would do the slow jam portion of the night where they would turn the lights down and they would play a song. And this one particular occasion, they played TLC's Red Light Special, which at the time I have no
Oh.
concept of what that means. I just know, it's a bumpin' R&B song. And I see one of my sister's friends sitting by herself. And now she's kind of just baggy clothes. She's very insecure. She was wearing, I think, a bum equipment sweatshirt, and she's kind of just crouched in the corner. And me being just so fearless as a kid, went up to her and asked her if she'd dance with me. And she did, and we danced to Red Light. And I don't know why, but it had such an effect on me. And I remember, similar to that, I had one of my sister's friends approached me again when music was playing, and it was one of those things where she was so taken by like, oh my God, that's so cute, that he would seek her out and he could recognize. And she had said, oh, well, I'm jealous because I didn't get to dance with you, little Eddie. And she danced with me to Linger by the Cranberries. And then after that, that was always you could throw a rock and hit like 10 people from my past who would be like, almost every night on Facebook, he would get drunk and he would post that song when I was single and be like, that's the song he wants. And ironically enough, that I actually unearthed in a journal like my list of wedding songs I wrote back in like 2005. And I'm going through the list, I'm like, we didn't play one of these songs at our wedding.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, that was one of those like super romantic. Because again, it was the zeitgeist. It was the 90s. You hear the Lemonheads and you swoon over Evan Dando, and you see TLC and they're gorgeous, but they're fierce, and their music is just really like, one minute they're writing a song about infidelity that you're just like, yeah, and the next minute they're writing a song about like, I have no shame, Red Light Special, I'll give it to you. And
Right.
it's just that was kind of the spirit of the time. And I just always felt that it was just such an innocent and just such a kind of in my mind, a romantic story, just to like, it's one of those nice things that you just want to hold on to, because as you get older, obviously, and you have
Yeah.
children and a spouse and whatnot and work, you tend to start to lose that feeling, that innocence, that sort of just that TLC feeling, I'll call it, or that, I swear feeling.
Yeah, yeah. And when you can get it from a book, or when you can sit down and just observe a piece of art that brings it back and livens that in you, that's amazing. So you did
Yeah,
that with your work, which is so cool.
that was always the idea. The idea was to always stay true, tell these stories, try to tell a proper horror story, not a conventional one, but I wanted to tell like a very offbeat story that resonated with me. And I just hoped that if you fell into that bracket of like you were Gen X, you were a millennial, or you were even my niece's age. My niece Haley's 21, and she listened to the same kind of music I did, and
Yeah.
you know, she heard a lot of the same stories that I heard. So
No, you're like a mixtape guy. When I write, I'm like headphones and I get stuck. I have probably three bands that I listen to exclusively. Did you have like a something that was kind of on repeat for you while you were writing this?
not with this one, no. In the one that I sent to you recently, there was one song that just on a loop in my head, and I'm basically writing to the song. With this book, it was kind of just going through my usual playlist, or my usual suspects of like 90s R&B. Like when I was in the middle of writing this, I was going through a very obsessive Janet Jackson phase. And I
Oh,
don't think Janet Jackson necessarily translates to macabre, but and actually it was 2 summers ago. So when this book was finished, I was obsessed with Sonic Youth, STP, Janet Jackson. So
okay.
I would listen, I use songs as almost like a conduit to take, or like a time machine to take me to, like, if I was in 94 in the story, okay, what do you remember about 94? And other things I would do that sound so silly. And my friend Tina just kind of laughed at me because she came over to visit my wife, and I had YouTube on my TV, and I was just watching old Nick at Night bumpers, like the things that they played in between commercials or whatever. And they had the jingles and stuff. And I was like, yeah, sometimes I just watch hours of this, and just because I miss that feeling of being a kid and seeing this on my television. And she just kind of looked at me and shook her head. She's like, you were such a dork. But it's one of those things, like, I'll go back and I'll sit through like 45 minutes of old pay-per-view, when they're trying to get you to order the movie. I'll just sit through like hours of that and just remember being in my basement drawing pictures, writing stories, and having that on as white noise. And I thought, well, that's kind of fitting if you're writing a 90s oriented book, to just try to have as much of the 90s playing in the background as possible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you captured the 90s so well. I always drew the parallel of that Ready Player One. Like somebody had told me about this book before I'd read it, and I just said, if you love any 80s pop culture, any of that stuff, you will love this book. When it comes to the 90s, I feel like what they achieved as Ready Player One is what you're achieving with Nothing to Get Nostalgic About. It has all of the 90s elements that if you spent even an iota of time in that decade, you will connect. It's all there. Look, the bum equipment sweatshirt.
Well,
It was
it's a decade that I think like most decades, I think it gets kind of fuzzy in the 2000s. But I think if you say, you know, perm hair, acid wash, jeans, denim jacket, immediately you're going to go, oh, 80s. But if you say bum equipment, caboodles, Teen Spirit, the deodorant, not even the song, but if you say like, oh, Teen Spirit, the deodorant, people just have that look in their eye, that gleam in their eye, that they're just like, yes. I mean, if you say Jinko jeans, my ass is just like, oh God, how many families could you have fit in one pant leg that I own?
Oh my God. So completely off topic, but I was at the mall the other day, and I don't know if it's gotten to the East Coast, but on the West Coast, it's coming back. The
Oh yeah,
fashion, it's all there. I felt like I had just transported into the 90s and went back to the mall at home. It's all
I'm
back.
I'm literally sitting here with my cutoff flannel shirt, thinking it's coming back to me. One day I will be relevant again, and I haven't changed at all. I still dress the same way I did when I was in high school, because it's one of those things.
It comes
People,
back.
yeah, well, people gravitate to what just fits them, and not to make this whole reading so sad, but when I was a kid, I went from having two older sisters to being an only child. So when there was in that summer of 98, I would find myself going into the basement on the end. We had this section called the unfinished side. It's where the boiler was. And that was horrible story involving a cat, but my parents never fixed our cat. So when our cat Tigger would go into heat, they would a padlock. They put a padlock on the door and stick her in there with a bowl and her litter box, and she
Oh,
would make these ungodly sounds of moaning. And my sister, I had a friend, got really scared because he could hear the moaning. He's like, "What's that?" And my sister turns to him and goes, "That's the annoying kid from the last sleepover who kept giving us crap." So my parents locked him in the basement.
oh,
But, so I would go into the basement, and there were all these trash bags of my sister's old clothes. And it sounds so creepy or weird, but I would go through the trash bags and pull out old flannel shirts, and I would put them on, and I just started adopting their style as kind of a way of just feeling like I missed them, and I just felt so lonely as a kid at that period that like so I just started the flannel kind of became a security blanket in a way
yeah,
as a reminder that I'm not an only child. I did have sisters wherever they are, but
that's adorable. Like, yeah, that's a great story.
yeah,
Great stuff with that.
I made sure not to include all the really sappy and horrifically sad stuff.
No, you got to get it all. So when you wrote the first part of this book, you started off in third person, then you switched to tell the story in first person from Rachel's perspective, which is such a different, I love the way that you do that. But the way that you write the interview scene where Charlie is getting, to have an actual reading or and like a Q&A with an audience, and you get some really poignant questions from the audience. Now, when you were writing those questions, were there any of those that you're like, yeah, this is something that I've always dreamed of answering, or where did you pull those questions from?
So a lot of them, and the one with the girl, I had to edit because I'm like, oh God, my wife's gonna shoot me. She's gonna think I'm like fantasy writing. But a lot of that kind of came from a combination of trying to put yourself in this scenario that you'll never ever be in, of where you
Hmm.
could be at a reading or you could be at a college or something. And the other part of it was I wanted to reflect his crippling imposter syndrome in front of a room full of people. So prior
Okay.
to that, there were like these really monstrous figures antagonizing him, and then it was basically kind of addressing how I feel personally all the time, which is I'm one of those people that I want to head out for lofty. I want to head out for spectacular and amazing. And, I'd like to think that if I was in a situation like that, I'd be so quirky and witty and have all these amazing answers. But in reality, I'd probably be like, look 33, but feel like 10 years old on the inside, like shaking, like, oh my God, I'm such a phony. Like these people are seeing right through me.
Yeah,
And yeah, a
yeah.
lot of the answers to those they were callbacks to people I actually knew in my life, the Meredith Gunning one. Meredith Gunning was actually my philosophy professor in community
Okay.
college. She was one of my
Oh,
favorite
nice.
professors. Jimbo was actually, not that you could probably see it at all, and it's sad why I'm wearing it,
Yeah,
but
you gotta.
yeah,
Oh,
so
you got the metaphor?
that's actually Anthony. That's Anthony. His little brother passed away on New Year's Eve, but Jimbo was actually based off of Jabo, my friend Jabo.
Okay.
So he is not a raging alcoholic, but there are stories. There was very Jabo-esque qualities, and I always told him, I said, dude, if I ever publish a book, you got to be a character because he's one of those people that he has what I call a laugh track laugh, which is you will go out of your way to make him laugh because his laugh is so fucking amazing and contagious that
Yes.
I used to do a podcast years ago with him and this friend Cami, and people admitted to me the only reason that they listened to the podcast was they wanted to hear Jabo's laugh because
Oh
it
my
was
gosh.
so unique. And there was a part in the story where he's going on about how Jimbo was driving around for hours on the highway because he couldn't find the perfect bathroom, and then he winds up shitting his pants.
God.
That's an actual story that actually happened. And the part
Nice.
where he acknowledges, like, Charlie, I can't believe you put it up on Facebook, that actually happened as well. Because I felt bad because it was a moment of mania with Jabo, but we both had such a, I guess, dark, awful sense of humor with each other that we found this stuff funny. We thought, especially when you're dealing with mental health, we wanted to we didn't want to cower in the face of mental health. We wanted to just laugh at it, and we wanted to acknowledge that it's an extra appendage for sure, but it's not your most defining quality.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, that is one of the things I commend you for the most. When you talk about how you can write a character's thoughts and their motives so that something that people judge and might not understand, but then when they read where their motives are coming from, they can really sort of find a new layer and like reach out and love people. Like so many people are judging and they never take the time to understand them and love them. And you take these characters that I think a lot of people would judge and a lot of people would never even see past like a really, really thin surface. And you go so deep and you make them heroines and heroes and just relatable and lovable. And you can tell how much you love these characters. It just shines through in your writing.
That's a combination of, I think I'm an okay writer, and just that those were the real people. I mean, I grew up on the island of misfit toys, essentially. A lot of people I grew up around, my sister's friends, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say there would be any given weekend, there'd be like 20 bodies on the floor in our basement. And I'd go downstairs, my parents are pissed, like, oh, grab the bag of Fritos. Like, they're down in Jen's room. And I'd be like crawling over bodies. And next thing I know, I'd be sitting in my living room playing Super Nintendo and at this really hard level of Batman Forever or Donkey Kong or something. And these two guys who I've never met would just emerge from the stairs like big brothers with the greasy hair just all messed up and all over the place. And, you know, in their basketball shorts and their cut off, like whatever shirt. And they would sit next to me and just start playing Super Nintendo with me. So it was like I would hear what the community and what the parents and the schools were saying about these kids, but then I was essentially like room and boarding with a lot of these people. And as a young kid being very impressionable, like, look, they didn't have to be nice to me. You
Right,
know, most
right.
people in that period weren't very nice to younger kids. So they could have just as easily just basically pushed me aside and said, hey kid, we're playing your Nintendo. But a lot of my sister's friends and a lot of my friends growing up were they all actively rooted for each other because they knew that at the end of the day, those were the only people who were rooting for them at all.
Yeah. That's so cool. It's so cool because it shows you know a brotherhood and like a camaraderie that I don't think everybody really knows exists. And you show it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very real. I mean, to this day, there are still people who I've known since elementary school that I still, you know, we may not, obviously in the pandemic too, but we may not go out to cocktails every week because we got kids and families and stuff like that, or, you know, whatever they're doing. But we all still email, text, keep in touch. And I mean, that was the cool thing. For me, if this book doesn't even break even or it doesn't even do what, you know, you and I once talked about our number. What's our number? Oh
Yes.
God, I'm not even close to hitting my number. But the fact is, if I come close to at least getting, I've had so many great conversations with people just privately who the book would either inspire them to want to talk about something they never talked about, or it would just inspire them to want to talk to me. I mean, one of the biggest challenges for me as a very introverted person is just opening up to people and feeling comfortable enough. So to be able to have something in the world that's kind of acting as a catalyst to bring people back into the fold and kind of check in on each other, especially in this day and age, it's incredible.
That's a beautiful, beautiful summary and completely accurate. I love it. And you know, I think, you know, live by the ocean, metaphor of waves, like it's gonna come slowly. You're gonna get a little one, and then you'll get a little one, and then you're gonna get a big one that comes behind it. Like this is out there now forever. It is not going anywhere. People will keep going with it. And it just needs time. So the best thing that you did, and I was amazed watching you do this, was finally get a second book written. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
now.
it was scary because that was my whole thing, especially with, so when I was writing this book, Nostalgic, I wasn't writing poems anymore. So I finished Nostalgic, and then I was in a grad program where that's all I did was write poems, but I wasn't writing a book anymore. And
Mhm.
then I found myself in a point where I wasn't kind of doing anything anymore, and then poems would start to get published, and a short story would get published. But you know, then I found out Nostalgic was getting published, but there were no poems, there were no stories. But the one big thing was I would kind of consider was I wanted to be in writing what most bands are or what most musicians are with albums. Was I want to have at least 3 books to write. So when I got to finishing the promotional cycle on this, I just kind of came out and it just shocked the hell out of me because I was just like, you know what? If that's the last book I wrote, I'm just happy that it came so quickly and it just came so organically, and I didn't really fight against it and I didn't fight with it. So
Yeah. When when I read it, I was just blown away. I am so excited for you, and I think it's so good that you now have this to get your mindset on to start working on putting this out into the world and watch where this one goes and you can put this one to rest. This is amazing and everyone check this out. But
Thank you.
Eddie's next book is going to blow your freaking mind.
I mean, if nothing else, I hope it blows an agent's mind so I can at least have like a proper conversation about finding publication. But you know what? I had fun. This is the first time writing a book where I actually had a lot of fun, and I think that's why it came so quickly was because there wasn't a single night where I dreaded sitting behind the keyboard and writing it. It was just like, so when are we writing? And I've never, as somebody who had written 6 manuscripts, this one included, prior to that, it was just so surreal because it was like I've never had that momentum. Right as you said it with waves, surfers always, we use that analogy in radio. If you were on the beach, that meant you were out of work. If you were catching a wave, you were still working in radio. So I always kind of liked the sort of surfer analogy. And it was very true with the manuscript that I just finished, where it was like every night I was like, oh my God, I just caught another wave. Whether or not it's good or it's garbage or anyone wants it, it came to me. And the most important thing wasn't so much about getting it published as much as it was just finishing it and getting it out there. So
Yeah, yeah. I loved watching your whole Instagram feed every time you're like chapter, new chapter, this thing, and just the way that it was flowing from you. And yeah, it went so fast. And that you can do that is you're very prolific. When I was all said and done, I legit cried. And you're talking to a woman who only ever cried like the last time within the year was apparently when we did our Instagram live reading because I can't read my own book without crying or your book. But I legit finished it and just was moved to tears. And I loved when you asked me what part of the book was it that made you cry. And I couldn't actually, I mean, it was literally just seeing you go through that process and then sitting down and being like one of the first people to get to read it. I was like, I am going to put this out there. You are a master in the making. You have a gift that is limitless. I am so impressed by your writing. So I cannot wait to see where you go. I'm so proud of you.
I'm awful with compliments, but thank you very much. It means a lot, especially coming from you, having read your book and loved your book so much, and seeing what you're doing with these interviews with other authors and your friend, and having done these with you, and knowing your potential, your talent, your gifts. It's an endorsement that I will probably leave here going, oh my God, I hope I don't blow it. I hope I don't.
Right. Don't worry. Like everything I do now, when you were reading my book, I was terrified because I had read yours first and I was like, oh my God, this bro's got just talent. Like I don't know what you do when you write words, but you just flow prose that are eloquent and beautiful. And I think you just do it on a first draft. And your bag of tricks is enormous. I was actually thinking if I could make a meme and like what Eddie's got for like writing, it's everything. And I've got like this tiny little one and I just keep editing and double checking myself. But
It's annoying to people though because like I am with music, I would write songs. That was my first love with songwriting, and this buddy of mine, Mac, he was the bass player of my band, and he's like, okay, what key are you in? Well, what note are you hitting? I don't know how to read music. I don't know the names of chords. I don't know any of that. So like, I'll talk to my good friend Christy about, she'll read a poem or something. She'll address something, literary wise about it, and I'll just kind of be like, I don't know what I did. I just, it's sadly for me, it's the one thing that I think I'm okay at. There's a lot of stuff I suck at. I've told you this before. I'm not very good at so many things that when people are like, oh yeah, you're really good at writing, it's just like, you don't get egotistical about it, but you do feel like, thank God I'm good at something. I can hang my head on something. Even if I wind up working in an office for the rest of my life, at least I can tell my kids, hey, there was one thing I was pretty good at.
really, really, really freaking good at. Like amazing. Yeah. Anybody who hasn't seen me hold this up yet, please get this book, Nothing to Get Nostalgic About. You can check it out on Amazon, IndieBound, Barnes and Noble, link in bio for me. I'm sure it's all over Eddie's pages.
It was, I'll put it back. There was a while where I was getting so daunted by the process of selling it that I was just like, people know it's out there, they'll find it. then
Right. Yep.
I'm gonna have to get better at putting the link back up.
Yeah, it's I just trust that the powers that be somehow are making it sell over the interwebs, right?
Word of
Oh,
mouth, that was my go-to. Was if word of mouth pays off. I mean, I'm literally at a point where I was kind of promoting this as my last reading because I'm just kind of sitting there thinking, there's really nothing else I can say about it. It's just you're either going to find it and you're going to read it and you're either going to love it or hate it, or it's just it exists out there now. So
it is going to find its audience. I know that for sure. Well, we are coming up on the end of the hour. Does anyone have any questions? Any comments? Anyone?
I never
I
usually sweat this portion because I'm like, well, thank God we're so good at talking because then like
I know.
because I'm like, people pass in and pass out. That was the one big thing when I published this was like when I did my first Zoom, I think I told you, I was so terrified. I was going to be like, all right, does anybody have questions? And be staring at like 7 screens or however many screens and be like, this is awkward.
Right, right. I didn't actually see that at that time. I had a million things going on. You did that for Zoom, and I didn't tune in for it. When you hosted mine, I was like, I didn't know what Instagram Live was. I literally was like, I am fully trusting Eddie that he knows what's going on. And that was a blast. And I just, ever since we did that, this is the way to do it because you have so much to say, but not having that moderator, it just kind of stalls things. And
The Zoom,
I'm so,
the first one
go ahead.
went pretty good. But, oh yeah, not having a moderator was painful because it was just like it was so haphazard and all over the place.
Yeah. Talking with you is so easy. The last one I did when I didn't know the person and I was just kind of like doing it whimsically. I was looking at my sheet. I'm like, oh God, what, what am I doing?
You wouldn't know it though. I mean, I tuned in for that, and it looked and sounded just like what we're doing now. So I mean, I know you said that you have a few more of those, or potentially might have some of those around the bend. So I'm
Which
definitely
is,
looking forward, and we'll absolutely promote those because those were it was. It's fun to watch people excelling at what they're good at. For me, it's fun to
yes,
watch talented, smart, competent people just kill it. And then it's even more fun when you can say to yourself or say to someone like, "Oh, I know that person," and that's what makes the experience even cooler. It's like I know. So like for me, I was kind of studying you because I was kind of like, is she freaking out? Is she breathing? It wasn't like, oh my gosh, yes. It was more or less like, is she gonna have a fucking heart attack with this nice little old lady talking about her book? But that was great.
she was so proper and so British, and I was like, I'm so blah, California. Oh, anyways. Okay, well, I think we are pretty much done. I haven't got any questions, so unless you have any final thoughts about what you want to say, I just want to thank you for
Oh, thank
doing
you. It was
this.
a lot of fun. Thank you for doing this with me.
Absolutely. Okay, well, have a great night. Everyone who tuned
You
in,
too.
thank you so much for being here. And keep following Eddie because this is going to be a wild ride.
Thank you so much.
Have a great night.
You too.
Bye.